Okay. Today we're going to go over the USAS procedures for the calendar year end 2025. We'll talk about what is new with the 1099s, the steps that districts can do now, as well as some steps like configuration that the ITCs may need to do. We'll talk about the procedures to close the month end and the calendar year end, and we'll look at the standard procedures for processing the 1099s for printing as well as submitting the 1099s to the IRS. And then finally, we'll take a look at the ITC management application where the ITC would combine the files to submit the 1099s on the behalf of their districts. And then we'll talk a little bit about the corrections. Not much, because hopefully you guys won't have any corrections. So please ask if there's any questions. And this will be recorded. We'll start on well, the PowerPoint's out there. We'll start on the wiki page. On the main page, under the meetings and registrations, or meetings and trainings. And in the middle of the page, there's the calendar year-end meeting materials for 2025. So here, I have the PowerPoint, which it has a lot more in there than the checklist because there's more information like optional things. The checklist is included here on the resources, and it's also in the appendix under the checklists. There's links for the IRS, like the general instructions for certain information returns. If you click on that, I'm going to zip down to the bottom to show you where I got the last updated, where I put IRS updated January 2025. So down here is where I got that on this page. But if you need to, there's a lot of resources in this document that's linked as a resource. There's also where you can find the taxpayer identification program, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The TIN program, that's in the general instructions if you need more information on that. The instructions for the like specific forms, like the 1099s miscellaneous or the 1099s NEC. If you click on that, you can see it was last revised last April. So just keep an eye on these days. I have double checked them as of last night, but it doesn't hurt to double check them. This will refer to all forms, but it talks about what is new, the general instructions, the specific forms. And then I also included the FIRE system, the Filing Information Returns Electronically system that the IRS has. That was last updated, I guess last month. So if you click on there, it does mention, which we'll talk about, that the FIRE system as of the tax filing year or the tax year 2026 is going to be most likely retired. So there'll be a new system. So that talks about what's new here. And the application for the FIRE system, if you have districts that are filing for the first time. So there's information on that at this link. And then I provided the PowerPoint from 2023 because nothing has really changed. And we'll go through that today, but the PowerPoint is linked here. And then we also included the October 2025, just last month's newsletter had a little tiny article about the IRS fire system and the new system, which is called the IRS electronic filing system. So, which is this link up here. The new system is the new modernized system called the Information Returns Intake System. That's what the IRIS system stands for. Information Returns Intake System. So the plan is the IRS will phase out the fire system that we currently used, and then the data for next year, the tax data for 2026 that you file in 2027 will be most likely reported on the IRIS system. So I provided the links about this. Let's go into the first one. And here, what I wanted to point out, which is also on this right here, the introduction presentation, but you can find it here on the first link. And if you click on it, this is just a good resource, and it's as of August. But like it will, here's the agenda where it talks about the TCC application, the A2A portal that we as school districts and ITCs will be using, and then other resources. So I got this thing in my way, just a second. And then on page 5, it talks about the A2A, which USAS will implement for the reporting of this. But it allows the bulk filing, just like the fire system did, and it'll be submitted like the XML format. And again, SSDT will have this implemented for the reporting of the 2026 1099s that you report in 2027. Now, this taxpayer portal, we will not be implementing. This was designed to like few returns. And again, if you have 10 or more information returns, you've gotta, or you have to file electronically. And the information returns includes all returns, including W-2s and 1099s. So I'm sure all school districts across the state are doing it electronically. So we won't be implementing this, which also gives you the option of this. USAS will only be implementing this for the bulk reporting of the 2026 1099s. So on page 6, it talks about the retirements of the fire system. And it talks about the IRIS TCC application. This document here will walk you through the process of the registration process and the application. But the TCC number I wanted to talk about. As you know, the TCC number is like a 5-digit code that identifies the district or the business. The TCC number used for the current fire system cannot be used for the new IRIS system. So that's why I'm talking about this now and giving you the resources now, because the submitters of the 1099s will need to apply for a new TCC number through the IRIS system. There are differences in the codes. The fire system TCC starts with a numeric character, And the new TCC number will start with a D, like the letter D is in dog. So again, any submitters of the 1099s, whether it's the ITC or the district, will need to apply for this IRIS system TCC number. And so I gave you, we'll look at, so here's like steps on how to get started, register, apply, and then the links. Trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to point out. But it gives you screenshots and such. So that's one resource. Another resource that I linked was the actual, which I think on that original, no, I'm sorry, might be on this original link. You can find the application for the taxpayer TCC, but I provided the link as well. And before I click on this, at this link, you'll see this tutorial. So let's click there. It'll bring you to this. Here's the button to actually get to the application to apply. And then it says, before applying, please review this tutorial, which again, I found helpful and maybe even more so than the PowerPoint. But again, I've looked at both and I found that both were good resources. So let's click on that. This is just more of a list. So there's tables of contents that you can like click on and actually go to the page. So again, it gives you the screenshots and I guess steps for the difference. And again, it's going to be the application to application. I'm not sure if it's a format, or I don't know what it is, but that's what we're using as ITC and districts. It's not the taxpayer portal, it's the application A2A. And some of this might include information for like us for software developers, but again, I just put all the information out there because more information is better than no information. Okay, so there's the resource page. Does anybody have any questions before we start talking about 1099s? And again, we're here to submit a ticket as well if you have any questions or if you think of any later. All right, so one of the first, I did talk about this. One of the things that both you and the districts can do is get to know the forms and the due dates and familiar with those resources, which we just went over. But you'll want to know the forms because the purpose of the form and the filing of the forms are different. The 1099 NEC or non-employee compensation is designed for independent contractors and they are filed this year by February 2nd. And this is because, and I have that on the next slide. Well, actually, it's because January 31st falls on a Saturday. Excuse me. So thus, all the January 31st normal due dates are now February 2nd. So that's the 1099 NEC. The filing of 1099 miscellaneous needs to be filed electronically to the IRS by March 31st, but to the vendors and recipients by February 2nd. So again, I think everybody does them all at once. I would. I wouldn't just keep a chunk and wait another month, March 31st to submit. Um, And again, I shared the link here and the reminder that 10 or more forms you must do electronically. I did the link there is the general. I'm trying to click on a link, just a second. The specific instructions for the forms. Oh, I wanted it, I don't know if I said the types on the miscellaneous form. Besides, I just lost my train of thought. Miscellaneous 1099 are used for like rents, royalties, medical, health care, gross proceeds paid to the attorneys. So at the specific instructions, it does talk about that, about the different forms and the different types, including the gross proceeds from attorneys versus the payments to attorneys. So I just wanted to point this out. I believe all attorneys must be reported on a 1099, but the trick is to know which form. So the form 1099 NEC would be paid to attorney for legal services that they provided to the district. So for services. The 1099 miscellaneous form, box 10, would be created for an attorney for gross proceeds or like a settlement paid to the attorney's trust account or a payment paid to an attorney on behalf of the client. So, and it does talk about that here, but that's the general sum up of, um, in my terms, simple terms. And then you can also, I think it's down below about deceased employee wages. When wages are paid after the death, it talks about here that when they're paid after the death of the employee, it's paid on the 1099 miscellaneous form in box 3 and paid to the estate or the beneficiary. So that is the due dates and the forms. You do also have to know about the IRS schedule. Again, if you have districts that are first-time filers for the fire system, we'll talk about that process in a minute, but one of the steps is to create a test file, and those test files are only going to be available according to the schedule after January 5th or up until November 19th, if it's available. For regular submission of the 1099s, after their annual updates, it won't be available until January 6th. So the submitters of the 1099s won't be able to access the fire system to do that process. Before we get talking about the checklist, there are a few other miscellaneous facts that I put here just to talk about before we get into the checklist. One of them is I'm going to go kind of backwards. The calendar year end reports archive will populate in the system when the 1099 reports, files, and forms are generated. And they'll be found under the system's utilities menu under the calendar year tab. I'm going to go into the system and talk about the December posting period and the vendor adjustments. So currently, my posting periods in this demo instance, I only have November, October and November created. And we are currently in October, which is reflected up here in the right-hand corner. If December is not created, it doesn't have to be open or current, but you see it's not created yet, then you will not be able to use this drop down and find 2025. You won't see 2025 until December posting period is at least created. So another point too is vendor adjustments. We recommend dating adjustments in December's, but the posting period doesn't need to be open or current. Like normally it would need to be for any other transaction. But for the vendor adjustment, the posting period of December could be closed and not current to post the adjustment. But the key is as long as the posting period is created. So I'm going to create December and then show you the difference. Again, when you create a posting period, it's always going to reflect open. If you don't want it open, which means users can post transactions to that posting period, then close it. Because again, you can make adjustments, vendor adjustments dated in December, even when the December posting period is closed. I'm just going to leave it open for this demo purpose. And then um, so I'll just say, no, I think I got to leave it in October for my example. We are currently in October, and the vendor totals will be based on October. The 1099 reports are based on year-to-date data. So if you have a vendor adjustment dated and created for December 30th, but the current posting period is October, you won't see that on the vendor record until December. So I'll give you an example. My current period is October, and I have a vendor adjustment on this one vendor. We'll take a look at that. If you look at the vendor adjustment, it's dated in November for $950, but currently it's October. So you don't see the numbers on the record because these numbers are going to be based on the current period. So I hope that helps. Um, I think I was going to go here just to show you what the USAS software can do. It does generate and or print all the forms for 1099s, well, the 1099 miscellaneous and the 1099 NEC. The USAS software allows the generation of the XML files, which are often used for the third-party printing, like the Edge software, I think it's called, Edge Accountability. The software allows the generation of also to produce or generate the printer sealer PDF files, which could be printed through our software and then prepared in our software. The software also generates the submission tap files if the district submits themselves, and as well as the transmitter report It generates all the reference copies, which includes the state, the recipient, the IRS copy, the recipient copy, and the payer copy. And it can generate the correction files and forms. So the permission to see both the menu to access the, sorry, the 1099 extract option under the periodic menu in USAS. Only users with that permission will be able to see that menu option as well as seeing that tax ID number, which is like our social security number on the vendor. So let me, oh, and then the standard user does have that permission, but these users do not. So I'll show you the difference. I am logged into USAS as admin, and then I'll log into, I think it's a read only, but I'll look as a secretary. So I'm currently in as admin. And I have, sorry, I always go to the wrong menu. I have access to this menu, which does or can print the 1099 report, which includes information like the social security number. And notice now that December has been created, the drop down can be chosen. Um, I was going to show you the vendor. So if I go to that vendor with that permission, like the admin user, I can see this section, which includes the number. Whereas if I log into the system as a secretary set up with one of those other roles that does not have that permission, this is what it will look like. They will not have access to the 1099 extract menu option to generate the report. And then under the vendors, looking at that same vendor, you won't see the number. You'll see the type, but you won't see the sensitive information on the vendor record. Another miscellaneous thing I wanted to talk about. My mouse does not seem to be working. This is optional, but oh, let me go back to the admin user. This is optional, but it's an option for the districts to um, give a message to the person entering a new vendor or a transaction that they're entering on the vendor. So under the system configuration menu, you'll find a vendor tax ID number configuration. What this will do, it will allow validation when a new vendor is added or used, or when an existing vendor on a purchase order or an invoice transaction is used based on this configuration. So currently, I believe it defaults to no warning. So if the ID number, which is the employer information number, EIN, or our social security number, if the person's entering the new vendor and you don't mind that person not getting a warning when that field is empty in USAS, then they can choose no warning. But the other option is to require that tax ID number slash social security number, to require it for all vendors, or just require it for 1099 vendors, provide a warning for all vendors, or a warning for 1099 vendors. So according to this, the district has that customization to use on their vendors when they're entering it or using it on um, a transaction. And again, the field I'm talking about is this, the sensitive information. Again, this is totally optional, but the IRS does offer a tool called the IRS Taxpayer Identification Number Matching Program, or in short, the TIN or TIN matching program. This can be used and is optional to verify whether a vendor should be reported with, let me edit this. If the vendor should be reported with either an SSN or an EIN. And the link is in the PowerPoint or is on the IRS website. But what that will do, it's like an interactive site for instant validation of the tax ID type. So, but again, that's optional and available for everyone on the IRS website. So depending on who submits the 1099 files to the IRS, there are some configuration things to set up. So under the system configuration menu, uh, the IRS form 1099 submission configuration. If the ITC is submitting the files on behalf of their districts, they would leave this box unchecked, enter the ITC information, and any other updates needed. That's the important ones is the information for the ITC since the ITC will be submitting. If the district submits their own 1099 files to the IRS using the FIRE system, they would come in here and click that. But before they can do that, remind districts that they must have that 5-digit FIRE system TCC number or that transmitter control code that's required to log into the FIRE system in order to submit. Excuse me. And again, in the PowerPoint and on the calendar year-end review page, there's the link for the FIRE system if they need to even apply for that TCC number in order to submit this year. And if they do need to apply, those first-time filers are required to submit a test file. This test file, again, can be created here in USAS. Oops, I needed to set that. I'm going to go in this other instance because this instance does have it set to be the district submitting their own. So I'll show you that. District will submit their own. They don't need the ITC information because it's going to be the district's information, but the contact information would be needed. So Oh, the test file. When that's checked and they have a new TCC number, that test file can be generated in USAS down below by just checking the test. That option's only available for the districts submitting their own file. All right, so I think that's all the miscellaneous information. Some things that you can do now through December is the districts will want to review and verify their vendors. They'll want to review and verify the 1099 addresses, which is located on the vendor record under the location section. They'll want to verify the vendor's 1099 type. So again, down below, you can have locations. Let me go to that other vendor. Okay, I was looking for something different. Oh, I was in the other application. So whether the ITC or the district submits, the district's got to or should verify their vendors. So again, I'm going to go to the vendor in this application. So the vendor address, hopefully this is big enough, would be verified under the or found under the locations. So you can see here it's the location name 1099 in this case is going to go to Michael Brown. The 1099 name is specified here. Generally, you can find that on W-9 or through other procedures that the district may use to obtain that. So if you need to update the 1099 address or name, that's where you would find it here. And I guess this is a little too big because I'm losing my voice, sorry. To make this location / address and name to be for the 1099 purposes, you would check mark this box. Notice that you can have different addresses and names for the PO and invoices by checking this box and having a separate location. And sometimes that is normal because the person creating the requisition or purchase order just knows it by Douglasville Cafe, whereas the 1099 would really go to the taxpayer independent contractor, Michael Brown. So that's perfectly fine. If the 1099 location is not specified, it will use the PO location. And then where you find the other information on the vendor record is up here in the 1099 section. This right here is a custom field that we created in this demo instance, which is also available to you guys. It's just creating a custom field for the vendor record. But normally you'll see this. You can choose to ignore the limits if you don't want to honor that, like that $600 1099 threshold. So anything above 600 would be provided on the 1099. In this case, if you check mark it and you only paid the cafe 200, it would create a 1099. Here is where you would choose which tax ID type and then the number. And then this is where you would choose your type of 1099. And again, those are the available types here. So Instead of going one by one per vendor, how would you even verify all this information? Oh, and I want to point out, here's the fiscal year to date or yet year to date taxable total that would be provided on the 1099. Most of the time that matches the year to date total. They could be different. If they are, you might want to advise them to look into it. I'm not sure of an example where they would be different, but it would be the year to date taxable total that would be on the 1099. But of course, districts don't want to go one by one to verify vendors. So there are options to verify all this data, including options that they can do this during the year. They don't have to wait for this time of year. They can do it sporadically, like quarterly. They might want to run, look at the vendor's grid for this information, or the other option would be to run a report called the SSDT 1099 vendor report under the report manager. Or, and we'll talk about these options, or you would run the report found under the 1099 extract menu. Those three options can be used interchangeably. I'm not sorry if I stumbled over that. Or at different times of the year. The vendor's grid is useful, like a quick look. So whereas the 1099 vendor report under the report manager would be a good report, possibly to run quarterly, to just to take a peek at the vendors. But let's talk about all those options, including the vendors grid. Hopefully you guys are aware of this More button, which provides options that you can select or deselect to put on your, to make columns onto your grid. If these are not open, there's a section 1099 where even the custom field is available. You'll want to do, again, remember that section on the vendor record of all those fields. You have options to choose, like the type under the tax ID, the tax ID number, the tax ID type, like Social Security or EIN. You also have the ability to pull onto this grid and then possibly make a report of the grid's results and pull in the default 1099 location. That is a lot of information on the grid, and sometimes you get excessive errors. And the SSDT vendor report has that address and it's formatted, so I would almost verify the address using that report instead. So we'll leave that off the grid. Under amounts, year-to-date taxable, if you wanted to, you could do the year-to-date total. And then as soon as I click off of this, the grid will populate with my column choices. And this is applicable to all grids in the system. So we have, this is where you would start filtering. For instance, you could want to just look at active vendors. You might want to just pick non-employee compensation vendors. Maybe I had a dash instead. So there, then I would even filter for the amount. So there's my non-employee compensation vendors for this year. My database is very small. But again, you can make a report of your grid results. There's 3 entries. You make a report. Of your grid results. You can customize this as you want. And you can also, when you're making that report, remember you can save the custom report and use it later under the report manager. So that's like non-employee. You might want to, okay, so that's good because that was my next topic. You often get this excessive error because there's so much data that the grid's filtering. So there's a couple options when you get this, other than cussing at your computer. One of the options is to generate the report. And I'll show you this in a second by we'll just say that. One of the ways is to make a report. The other option is the advanced query. This is going to filter down the grid even further and avoid that excessive query error. So I'm going to reset the grid, which returns the grid back to like the default grid, which doesn't have much information, but I'm going to take off that merge. So I don't need to know that. And I'm going to definitely pull in the year to date. I'm looking for the amounts. Sorry. There we go. So the advanced query, if I wanted to look at all or only 1099 vendors, I would set up a filter, which I actually have one set up. So I'm going to just pull that. So my filter or my query that I saved is called all but non 1099 vendors. So it's basically all 1099 vendors. So to create this, and then I saved it, and then it's available in the drop down. But what I did was pull these fields from over here and brought it over to the this grid over here. So I'm defining the type of 1099 to not equal any non-1099 forms. And then I'm going to add the filter year-to-date taxable total to be greater or equal to 600. So we'll pretend I just created that. If I wanted to save it for next year, I click on this, I name it, and then it's available like it is for me next year for you. So once you apply this, and I would even maybe even filter just active if you wanted to. Once you apply this filter, the grids will populate down here. And again, you can generate the report and we don't have that error. You can specify other, well, like this is specified just for non-vendors. You could do royalties. If you wanted to save it, you could, but once you apply the query, that wasn't supposed to happen. Um, so clear it and hide it and go back to the grid. I'm gonna show you the queries that I have set up. So that was all 1099 vendors. This could be set up for the type of non-1099 vendors. And you would want to maybe review these for to look at vendors that are flagged not to get a 1099, but maybe are over that $600 and maybe should get a 1099. So I believe I get an error. Yeah. I still get an error, but this is my point. I still saved the query down here, non-1099 vendor review, and we'll use that in a report in a moment. So I wanted to show you that. Another one I set up is the royalty. There's my royalty. I don't know why that didn't, oh, I didn't have the filter. I just put royalties. That's why it didn't work earlier. It's royalty payments. And to get that filter value correct, remember on the vendor record where there's a drop down to choose that type? Those are the types that you need to type in correctly and not incorrectly like I did. So again, you can make a report of the grid's results. You can save the report. Here's the query that I saved. And then if you recall, which one was it? This one that gave us the error. Yep, the non-1099. So let's go to, because remember I said the other option was to use a report in the report manager. And that report is called the SSDT 1099 vendor report. I wanted to point out that there's two on this grid, and obviously I customized one, but what I wanted to point out is on the report manager, you have the ability to tag reports. So, and this is just a tidbit. Um, you can tag a form, you can tag reports regarding workflows, you can name whatever your tags are, but in this case, it was 1099 custom. So back to the agenda. This is the standard one. So if I open that, you can customize this. I have an example, but I got to find myself in my notes. So if you just generated this, this is what the configure filters look like, and it will include all 1099 vendors. So the type not equaling the non-1099 vendors. And it has the other parameters set up. This report's gonna create a report that includes the taxable. So let's just generate this. And then we'll customize it. So this report, like I said, I mentioned earlier, it's going to be by type. There's non-employee. Sorry for the scroll. I think I have other types. There's the medical, even though there's zero. So it'll sort by the type of 1099 and subtotal, both the year-to-date taxable and the year-to-date total, and include the 1099 location address, the name of the vendor, and the vendor number. So it's a pretty useful report. That's just the standard. But again, you can customize this. You can update these configure filters and just put like royalty payments or medical payments or whatever those types that you want specified. Or this is where you can use that query that we set up under the advanced query. So remember, this one errored out on the grid with the excessive error. But if I wanted to generate it and use it in this report, I get the report without the error with more information on this report than the grid because I didn't pull in the address onto the grid. So again, you would look at this report for non-1099 vendors just to see, um, should Joe Spears get a 1099? Currently, he's flagged not to, but what kind of work did he do? Should he be getting a 1099? So those are the things that you would want to verify and review. Not you, but the districts. All right, and then the last option that you can utilize to verify and review reports would be under the 1099 extracts menu. Again, this will only show 2025 when the posting period of December has been created. Once you select, notice these aren't populated for the report, but once you select these, it becomes populated. So then you could generate this. If you get a pop-up, which I believe, yeah, double check your pop-ups. If you didn't get a report, double check that. It seems like I always get a pop-up. Oops. So this is the sample report that's found under the 1099 extract generate report. Same information, different format, more district information like as a header. But again, it's the same information. Um, this report is going to include both active and inactive vendors, excuse me. It will subtotal by type. I only have the non-employee non-employee compensation 1099 report here. Here's a miscellaneous one. Well, that didn't work. I must not have miscellaneous 1099s in this database. Or it was blocked by the pop-up. But this is what the report looks like. As you're verifying, if you need to make a vendor adjustment, we did talk about this earlier, but it doesn't hurt to review. Under the vendor, um, when you're viewing it, there's a button here. First, I'm going to move this down. Oh, I'm in the wrong document or wrong instance again. I'm sorry. That's why this report didn't give me both. Let me do that. So the 1099 miscellaneous report from that menu, this is what I want to show you, will generate by type and total. It has the address. It just has more information about the district. So it's just the preference of how the district wants to verify their data or how they want to use it throughout the year. So if they find something that needs to be corrected, whether it's um, if it's the address, you would do it under the location down here and update the address. If it's the amounts, you would update it by processing a vendor adjustment, by viewing it. And again, what I wanted to show you was we were in October, and I'm going to make a December adjustment. Uh, and I would put as much information here as possible, because in 2 years, you're not going to remember why this adjustment was made, or I wouldn't remember, I should say, 2 years later, why this was made. So I'm just going to make up description. Sometimes it can happen with a check, a voided check that was reissued. It was a 2024 check that was processed and reported on the 2024 1099, but when it was voided and reissued in 2025, it shouldn't really be in the 1099 totals this year. This is going to default to taxable. Again, if you recall, those boxes are normally the same, but you can make them different. Oops, I lost my adjustment, didn't I? I'm just going to put test. And then again, you put the description. You can uncheck that if you're only doing the year-to-date total. And again, I didn't date it in December, but I wanted to. That way it's on the December reports. It's in the, when you're in December processing, your reports and your 1099s, it's just there. All right. So you can see it didn't do anything to the vendor totals. And if you recall, it's because it was a December adjustment, but we're in October. So just to show you the example, I am now in December when I click current. If I go back to that vendor, and I forget what vendor, but it's probably this one. Nope, it was the other one. Sorry. You will see that it was adjusted. It was 755 and now it's 700. I took away that 55. So these numbers will not be reflected until the current period of the adjustment. Okay, and if you have a lot of adjustments, which hopefully you don't, but in the documentation, there is the ability to import vendor adjustments. So in the documentation under core vendors, you will see the import criteria for the vendor adjustments. Seems like it's going a little slow. Okay, so import vendors, you can import new vendors, but under here, vendor adjustments criteria. And we provide the template spreadsheet. So there's the process, the required fields, and the format. So if needed, that can be used. And then we also had a newsletter article, which I did include. Let me just show you on the PowerPoint. It was slide 36. I provided the link to the newsletter. That's November 2023, but it's still applicable about vendor adjustments. And the link is here to that newsletter article, as well as the documentation that we just looked at for the criteria. All right, any questions so far? So let's assume that all the data is verified and complete and everything looks good. So now the steps are to generate the 1099 forms and to print the files in USAS, as well as submit the forms to the IRS, whether it's the ITC or the district, and then closing the month, which will also close the calendar year. So we'll start with generating the 1099 forms for printing. What I'm going to do is try to pull up the checklist side by side to the application. I kind of wanted it the opposite way. Oh well. So, oops. This is where we're generating and printing and the options. So under the periodic extract menu, I am in the district where the ITC is submitting it on behalf of the district. I will pull up the other instance as well to show you when it's applicable for when the district is submitting themselves. But currently we are in the one that the ITC prepares. So following the checklist, you can see that, again, the payment year, you have to select the form. You can do one, you can do both, but until you select, these won't populate or generate. If both are selected but don't generate the reports, check your pop-up blockers. And then down here is the output file types that I wanted to talk about. As the user selects these, there are going to be different options that pop up here. But the IRS format is the one that creates the TAP file that is used for the IRS submission. The XML format is the one that, and it looks like I have an error in the documentation because that should say XML file. That would be the XML file that would be used in the third-party software to print the W-2s there, not the W-2s, 1099s. The reference copies are when this is selected, the options change and adds this because the reference copies are going to be the PDF copies that will be printed. So let's look at that. There's 5 different reference copies, and they're noted here in the documentation. Copy 1 is this for the State Department, whereas copy 2 is for the recipient state copy. Copy A is for the IRS. Copy B is for the recipient. When you choose copy B, another option pops up to truncate the numbers, the SSN or the EIN IDs. And in that case, if you did that, it would only show the first 5 digits of the number. That is only available to the copy B, which is for the recipient, or copy 2 for the recipient. And copy C is for the payer. So those are the reference copies that the district would be generating. And then finally, the printer sealer copies can be generated in USAS for the direct printing of the 1099s. These will be formatted to the 8.5 by 11 Z fold forms, which is noted in the documentation. So you can choose one vendor, or if you leave them blank, it'll choose all. The output file name is pulling from the core organization menu. So in this case, it's Sampleville Schools, and that's going to format the file name like that. The exclude vendors with no tax ID, that's a choice that the user has to exclude them off the report. However, if you exclude them and they should be reported, that could be a problem. But you can check mark or leave it unchecked. The organization information is pulling from the details under the core. So the TIN, the name of the school, the treasurer, the things that I had entered in under the organization. The difference between the ITC menu and this is the district that's going to submit themselves. Everything's been the same except for now we need the contact information. So when the district submits their own files, they're going to have to populate this information in order for it to be on the file. Whereas in this demo instance, where the ITC submits it to the IRS, you're going to combine those files in that ITCM application and provide the contact information there. For districts that are submitting their own, this is only available to them. Check if the submission is for a prior year. You would check that if it is. They would also have this for approved for a combined federal state filing program. This only shows if the district is unable to submit their own files. And if it's showing the default, or if it's check mark, it can be unchecked if needed. What that is after the approval of the TCC number and that test file that the first time filers submit to test to see if their file works, it allows the IRS to submit the states with the federal. So it's like a combined federal state filing system all at the same time. And then if either ITC or district, these are on the same menu and can be updated as needed. The pay control or payer name control is an optional field, and it was the 4-character code that the IRS assigned when the district applied for their TCC number. It's an optional field. It doesn't need to be populated, but it can be. We talked about this button before where it generates the report. When the generate button is processed for any of these files or types, it'll be sent to the calendar year end reports archive when the extract generate is run. So when this button is pushed each time for the formats, it'll be sent to the archives. You can also schedule these. So under, let me back up. You can schedule all these forms or file types under the utility job scheduler. You would create, and hopefully this is big enough. I'll put it in the middle. But you would set up the cron schedule by using like those free programs that we have documented. But here's the different copies. Copy C, 1099. Remember the different, like all the reference copies. You can schedule all the reference copies through a cron job, or this one schedules the job to generate all of the 1099s. So again, there's choices there. You would choose your selection, and then you would enter your cron schedule, which I didn't look up to use, but it would be like that is just the frequency of which the job is generated. All right, so now all the 1099s are generated and should be in my file archives. Well, ignore the reports, but there's the extract reports from when I generated it. And then now it would be time to start thinking about closing the month. So, sorry. For month end, this is normal for every other posting period, but you would enter all your transactions for the month of December, including receipts, disbursements, interest, payroll. Make sure all the transactions are entered. You'll want to reconcile the bank accounts. And there's the in the calendar year checklist, there is that link to the bank reconciliation procedure with helpful tips as well. You'll want to generate these two reports, which what this does is ensure that the transactions detail from the financial detail matches what's on the accounts. So for instance, let me give you an example. What you'll be wanting to compare is the cash summary and the financial details. So at the bottom of the cash summary, the fiscal year to, or uh yeah, the fiscal year to date receipts should match what's on the financial detail. So received amount on the financial is 34,450. Whereas on the cash summary, it's also 34,450. And then the amount expended is 15,656. On the financial detail, the expended amount is the same. So that's a good sign. So you would continue on. The user may generate additional reports at month end. The regular reports that are generated are listed in the PowerPoint as well as the documentation. But examples of reports they might want to generate would be custom reports that the district may have set up, or the spending plan reports, like the spending plan summary. But again, those are optional. They would want to generate any calendar year end reports that may be needed. And again, those reports are not only on the PowerPoint, but they're also on in the documentation. If there's reports that are on this that they have created, they could generate any of those custom reports. There's also a proration utility that can be useful sometimes at the end of the year, like for workers' comp expense. So I believe districts receive their workers' comp bill. I believe, I'm not sure, but for like the last 6 months. So they could take that expenditure, we'll just say for an easy number, $10,000. Take that expense of $10,000 and prorate it against salaries paid. So based on the accounts where the salaries were paid from in the system, that $10,000 would be prorated against each one. And then what's nice about that is you could set up a mapping utility to map those wage prorated amounts to the benefit workers' comp account. And so your benefits would be posted. Why that's nice is then you can create a like import, you can create a spreadsheet that you can use to create and import into a purchase order using that expenditure posting to benefit accounts. Now, we do have this coming up. There's a Fridays with Fiscal training that I'll be putting on in December that will go in much more detail with examples of like these two examples, workers' comp proration, and then like an insurance example. So there was one in the past, I believe it might have been 2023, excuse me, that you could reference now, or you can join us on December 19th or watch the recording afterwards. Oops, sorry. The calendar year and archive found under the utilities menu. Also, when these are generated by the user, these files will also be included in the calendar year report archive. And of course, the transmitter report is only going to be included if the district submits the files to the IRS themselves.
Hey Pat, while you're on this page, there is a question in the chat, and I think it's pretty much related to this one.
The I don't believe it's automatically scheduled. You would have to set that up under that job scheduler. So you would go under here and then choose this one to create all your 1099's copies. And then once you put in the cron schedule, you can submit that. I believe it was available last year because it was on my PowerPoint from last year. But generally too, I think they probably, I don't know if they, I don't know how districts do it. But that is one of the options where you can schedule all those 1099 forms and files to be generated under the job scheduler. Any other questions?
I see Andrew has another question in the chat asking if we've done that in the past. You're right, Pat, that's a new option, but the slide you were showing as well, just to note, is like they do get automatically generated also when you run the 1099 program. So I think that might be what you're thinking of as far as what it's done previously.
Oh, when they're generated by the user, they'll populate
Yes.
and yeah,
And then in addition to that, they could schedule a copy on that cron cycle to go to the file archive as well.
right. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Um, so they're ready to close the month, which closes the calendar. They would make sure any custom report bundles that the district may have, I would not change it to January as the current posting period if these bundles are generated on these events. I would wait until the report bundles are complete before changing it to the new posting period. And then, of course, if there's a payroll pending transaction file or something, once you're in January and it's the current new posting period, I would just double check for any pending transaction that might be sitting there. So now, submitting the files to the IRS can be done by the district or the ITC. The file names are going to be like the school underscore 1099 and then the type of the form or both. So you can have this file name, that file name, or like my example, it includes both. You would take that TAP file either from the calendar year end report archive or those that are generated and saved by the user and submit it under the FIRE system. Now the ITC that are the ITCs that are submitting on behalf of their districts, they would again download from their district's calendar year reports archive. The file names are the same, but they would be using the ITC management application to combine all their district's files into one file to submit to the IRS. I would take you into this application, but last night I realized that I was not able to log in with my current password. But these slides are on our resource page for the calendar year and procedures, and they're detailed. So I think it gives you enough information and screenshots to where um, you would be where you could use it. But this is just a separate application where they merge all the 1099s and W-2s and ODGAFS data files into one file. There's the user manual for this application. And then back in 2022, we did a Fridays with Fiscal, which is going to show these slides as well. Nothing has changed from in that application. But this is what it looks like. And on this menu, there's the user menu and the monitor menu. The users would give you the ability to view, add, or edit the ITC users, to update the users' passwords, or to unlock and lock the users, or to assign the roles. The monitor displays all the authentication events when the user logs in and out of the application. And the grid results from that could be exported if needed to a CSV spreadsheet. The organization tab or menu sets up the ITC's name and address, kind of like that contact information where when the district was submitting, they put it into USAS. You're combining the files here. You would have to put it on this file. So that's what you're doing here. Um, This is what the menu looks like, the districts and then the mass loading. You would, there's the districts menu. You would add districts by single entry or by mass import, which if you were going to do mass import, there is the sample template spreadsheet that's also found in the manual. You would review it and then click edit or delete the district from the grid if needed. And then to merge, here's your left side menu option, 1099 merge, but it opens up to this where it has the 1099 entry, the merge, and then the results. So the entry, you would upload the TAP files that you received from the USAS district files. You would click new item, and this would be displayed to fill in and choose. And then upload the 1099 file with the button. The merge tab merges the data entered into one appended file by clicking this button. And then the merge options or the merge results will display the TAP files for the districts selected in that step of the merge. The district number will be included, so you can verify that, the total number of districts here. You can review the details by clicking on edit or by you could download by using this download button because that's the file you use to submit into the IRS fire system. This will be the merged file. Sorry about that. So you can download the merged data into a spreadsheet. You can view it. You can scroll down to the district results, or you can extract the results by using that button. And just a note, when you're submitting data like 1099s electronically, the IRS 1096 form is not required. So sometimes we get that question. And then 1099 corrections. I put the resources here, which includes the general instructions, the publication 1220, which is a great document, the documentation link to the corrections, and then the Fridays with Fiscal that I believe Amanda did back in March 2024. Here's the YouTube review of that process. I would review those resources though, because sometimes if the original submission files haven't happened yet, you may be able to correct the 1099 and then resubmit the original file. Or you might have to use the correction forms to update the 1099s that happen after the original file was submitted to the IRS. And I put the links here to those resources as well. There are different types of corrections. Um, and again, the resources will give you some examples and scenarios, but in the USAS, type 1 can be used for incorrect money amounts or the wrong code or checkbox, possibly a return that was filed for John Doe but shouldn't have been. You would make a type 1 1099 correction, or those errors that require only one, or type 1 corrections only require one return to make the correction. So in that example where John Doe received a 1099 but should not have, the one return would be the return that is marked void. So that's all. And that's the correction form. There's only one form to correct the error. Whereas the type 2 correction forms are going to have two separate returns filed in order to make that correction happen. So in this case, it would be like there's no social security number or EIN number listed on the 1099 or the incorrect pay name. So the first correction form would be the original return indicating that the original return was wrong, and then the second return would be the one that would be the corrected return, basically. And if you need to correct returns, 1099 returns, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to help. And then we have some upcoming calendar or upcoming Fridays with fiscals that I listed here. I also list the link where all those resources were here, which is also on the documentation or under the meetings and training page. I hope you guys join us for the recap releases and the W2 special reporting, as well as the proration utility process that sometimes can be helpful to generate at the end of the calendar year. Any questions? I know that was a lot. I went longer than I thought I would, but um, I don't see any questions. But if you guys think of any, please put in a ticket. And good luck with 1099s and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Pat. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.